Welcome to Corporate Cafecito,
a Latine and business podcast where we share insights and strategies to help entrepreneurs and professionals thrive.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Corporate Cafecito. Yo soy Nayeli Suarez Gas.
Y yo soy Carlos Butler Vale.
We have a guest. You know, part of our goal is always to bring you the most fabulous Latines, making it happen and doing things around the world. And Danny, I'm gonna tell you, you're probably the most Mexican-looking Puerto Rican I've ever seen. Okay.
Hey, I used to get that a lot. So I don't know how I feel about that. I'm just kidding.
Like that, and maybe you would be more of like the Latino extraordinaire because not only are you, you know, Puerto Rican and have lived in the United States and all this, but you've traveled to so many beautiful countries all over Latin America. Where are you? Tell us about yourself, but also start with where in the world are you?
There you go.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Danny Miró-Chinea, currently based in Buenos Aires, Argentina. But yeah, as mentioned, I've lived sort of all over. Grew up between Puerto Rico and Florida. Have lived throughout the United States, kind of post college. And since August of last year, kind of started traveling throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. So spent some time back home in Puerto Rico, spent some time in Colombia, spent some time in the Dominican Republic, and now kind of exploring Argentina. And we'll see how long I stay here or kind of where I go next.
I don't know. I've been seeing all of your posts and it seems like you're really digging it. So, you know, you're having some really awesome adventures. I'm so happy to see it. But you're also doing some really cool things along the way as well.
Yeah. Tell us about what you're doing, or what profession allows you to do all this fun stuff.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess profession now is a little hard way to put it. I would say I kind of do, three different things. I sort of tell stories, I help brands, and sort of create experiences. So, but it's all centered kind of around Latinidad. So on the storytelling side, I started a platform about 2 years ago called Comprende, where we feature stories primarily of Latino and Latina entrepreneurs, business owners, and kind of the stories behind them, as well as different things around our culture and the social impact that we're having in the United States. Kind of through that, it kind of brought me into the world of Latino marketing, which is why I say those other two things, where a big part now kind of my focus is helping brands and companies, everything from fast-growing startups that are Latino founded, all the way to larger Fortune 500 companies that are trying to more authentically reach our demographic. And then lastly, sort of through that, I sort of do my own creative work on different projects as well, everything from kind of live experiences to things online, to social media, again, all centered around elevating Latinos.
That's amazing. And we'll go into your background a little bit more, but it's funny. I was thinking back to how we ended up sort of getting connected, because you know that's obviously a big part of what we try to do is to get involved and get engaged. And I remember just seeing some of your posts on LinkedIn, and I also remember how supportive you were. And like, you know, I think to me that that always speaks very highly of an individual who's not just out there trying to put out content, but is giving people the high
Yeah.
fives, the applauses, the hearts, and, obviously trying to get the word out because we all know that the algorithm is the algorithm,
Right.
right? And that can obviously make it more difficult for some voices to be heard or make it easier for others to be heard. But I just want to commend you for that because I think that if I'm not mistaken, you had initiated kind of the conversation and then we got connected, and that's when I was finally like Nayeli,
Like,
we
we
gotta
need to
have
talk to
him.
this
Yeah, we
guy.
need to have him on here. So you are doing a lot of social work, but tell us a little bit because that's not where you started. So tell folks
Yeah.
about what your background was in terms of your education. And then that I think goes into the next part, which is how you ended up here.
Yeah, tell us about your bougie college.
Yeah, that's right. Her words, her words.
Well, first off, I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate those kind of words. A lot of people kind of have given me an opportunity, and in a small way, if through social media and especially LinkedIn, which I'm a big proponent of, if I can kind of give back in that way, I love to do so. So I'll just kind of start with that. In terms of my journey, yeah, it was sort of an interesting and kind of unique one. So I was fortunate to go to Bowdoin College, which yes is a small sort of school that not a lot of people know about, but it's one of the best schools in the nation and one of the top kind of small private liberal arts colleges. And I was fortunate to go almost on a full scholarship.
Nice.
That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
Now, there's no way I would have been able to do.
We love that.
Um, and sort of through that experience and kind of growing up, I really thought I wanted to be an attorney. I have had many interests throughout my life, but kind of my final years of high school and going kind of into college, that's the route I thought I wanted to take. It was either that or engineer or doctor, right?
Like whatever
So
it
for
was, you're
me,
going to be in school a long time.
Yeah.
exactly. And so I kind of started taking that route, and I was very fortunate to, throughout my kind of college career, do different internships in the legal aid space. I worked in immigration, human trafficking law, and public defense work in DC. And ultimately, after graduation, I sort of started my career in corporate law at Skadden Arps, just sort of one of the top three largest
Hmm.
corporate law firms.
That's
Um,
amazing to
Hmm.
like to come out of college with your like law degree, pass the bar, and then go into a top three. That's crazy.
Well, I didn't go into law school just yet.
Okay, okay. All right.
Yes,
Sorry, I don't know how it works.
But
So
actually,
I
that is, I mean,
graduated
but
my,
that's even
Yeah,
cooler,
that's
I
yeah.
think. The fact
yeah,
that you hadn't
yeah.
gone to law school and still be
Exactly,
able
yeah.
to do that.
So they had a program sort of, which I do recommend, even though I didn't end up going the law route, which we'll get to. But they kind of at the time, not sure if they still do, but had this program for kind of legal practice assistants. So almost like a paralegal, but working very in depth on some really big cases. And the idea is kind of everything goes well, and then you decide to go to law school. It's a
Mhm.
very kind of nice shoe in into the law firm. And I went specifically in as a kind of bilingual Spanish speaking paralegal, which also allowed me to do a lot of really interesting pro bono work using the resources of such a big firm. However, throughout that time, working sometimes 70, 80 hours a week,
Mhm.
you got to be honest. Sometimes you question, like, is this really what
Like
I want
esto no
to
es para mí.
Yeah, yeah.
do? Right. And at the same time, I had a lot of people always tell me, especially some attorneys, that, hey, now things are a little bit different. Like, not everybody goes right into law school. So,
Mhm.
they commended what I was doing in terms of taking that time to explore before, but they always said, hey, if you want to explore other things, you can always go to law school, a little bit later. And so that was kind of on my mind. And, I kind of mentioned to you all when we first spoke, but a big kind of reason why I wanted to go into law was to try to help change Puerto Rico's political status,
Yeah.
which is a big mission and big undertaking, but that's always how I like to think. And once I realized being in DC, seeing how the legal system really works and how money essentially really moves everything, um, I realized, there's probably something else I can try. But when I was thinking about that, the thing that kept coming back was entrepreneurship. I always had, little small projects growing up and little businesses and things like this, but I never really thought I would kind of make a career into it. But throughout that time, I was also kind of reading a lot about kind of founders, listening to podcasts, and something kind of told me, why isn't there more stories of people that look like me,
Yeah.
and why isn't there more kind of entrepreneurs really trying to build, big businesses? And so, while I thought that was maybe initially what I wanted to do, it really sparked this idea of jumping into entrepreneurship. Um, Thankfully, I was accepted to this fellowship called Venture for America, which ultimately took me from DC to Miami. And it's a fellowship all around kind of creating economic opportunity through entrepreneurship and sort of
Mhm.
emerging tech cities. And I went from being at this, huge law firm with all these amazing perks to being, the second hire at a really small company. But at a contrast, right? Instead of, feeling like a number in this bigger machine, I had equity in the company. I was
Wow.
growing. I learned about raising venture capital. I learned about building
That's so
a
cool.
team, growing a team, marketing, design. I had to kind of essentially wear every single hat.
Yeah.
Uh, and it was a wonderful experience.
It's how
I
you
learned a
learn.
lot,
Yeah. Yeah.
and ultimately realized, this is what I want to do, which brought me, eventually to ideating and starting to build Comprende. Um,
So, one of the things that we love is highlighting like our community, right? It's so special, it's so unique. And so I applaud you for dedicating like your life's work to our community. Um, how do you define like, we talked about like Latinidad. When we're in the US, we know we're Latinos, but when you're everywhere else, you're probably Puerto Rican, right? Like they don't say like, oh, we're Latinos or like how has it been your experience? And I'm not sure what I'm trying to ask, but like as you navigate it, like one, I think it's beautiful to absorb the other cultures, but how have you found yourself feeling when you're not in your home country?
hmm.
And trying to define Latinidad still.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question, and I think, for me, identity was always kind of complicated. Growing up between Puerto Rico and Florida, and we did move, a number of times. And so when I would go back to Puerto Rico, I started to become like a gringo versus
Yeah.
back to Florida. I was, the Latino, I was the Puerto Rican. And navigating that growing up was kind of a bit, complicated until I finally, was fully embracing, my definition of Latinidad and my own self as a Puerto Rican. And now kind of traveling in these different places, it's exactly kind of what you mentioned, which is it's unique, right? It's like when I go to Colombia, it's like, okay, we're Colombian, we're Puerto Rican, and
Yeah.
the idea sometimes, they might, say something about another country or this and that, or have
Hmm.
perspectives, right? Um, but when you come to the U.S., right, what
We're all
I've
the same.
interesting, we're all kind of, for better
Lumped.
or for worse, right, lumped
Yeah.
into this group of Latinos, right? Um,
But when I think about that, I think it's very beautiful because like the thing that binds us, right, is our food, right? We all have arroz con frijoles. How you eat them may be different, but it's a staple. We all speak Spanish, maybe different dialects, different words for things, but it's the same mother tongue.
Other than Brazil.
Except for Brazil, yeah.
Except for Brazil.
And
We got to give
then
our Brazilians a shout out because we do have some folks actually from
yeah, we
Brazil.
do. Yeah. And then I think about like our religious culture, right?
Yeah.
Our beliefs and that like it's all the things that bind us and like things about like how we treat our elders and things, like when I think about the Asian culture, it's very defined like the elders and the respect and things like that. And I think it's really beautiful because we have that too. And it
Mhm.
doesn't matter which country you're in, as Latinos, we have that same shared belief.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I would say, those three things, culture, language, and values, really are what kind of connect us.
Yeah.
And there is so much strength, and it is something that is so special. And that's, a big part of the message that I try to share when I talk about Latinidad, whether it's more from, this storytelling angle, or, on the brand side, is helping, us recognize, right, the nuances of being Latino and how we are from these different countries. But ultimately, right, those shared threads that kind of bring us together and unite us, is what makes it so special. And so sometimes, there is some level of, let's say, competition, right? Or,
Especially in
"Oh, we're
soccer.
not we're not
Although
the
Mexico
same."
just won la Copa de
Yeah.
Oro.
We're,
Exactly.
I'm happy for them.
But yeah, but ultimately, my perspective is, unidos somos más, right? Together, we're
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
And by leaning into that Latinidad, I think it's very powerful, and I think it's, what we should do as immigrants or Latinos, no matter what country you're from.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. And actually, as I was thinking as you were asking the question, some of the countries that you've been to, obviously, I'm also Puerto Rican. I was born on the island. I was raised there. And when I go back, I am always so just reminded of obviously the diversity. But, you put 10 Puerto Ricans in a room and they all, could look very different.
Mhm.
But a
Mm.
lot of the places that you've been to also have a really interesting history of like, there's a lot of colorism, obviously, that
Lots of
happens
colorism,
within,
yeah.
our community. There's a lot of stereotypes that are always being reinforced. I can imagine and we had someone here from Argentina actually not long ago who was talking about just even her own
Yeah.
process of identity as having been someone who had an Italian last name, who looked very Italian,
Mhm.
who, and all of that. But I think about Dominican Republic, Colombia, Argentina, Argentina. Like I imagine that that is some of the complexity that you're also having to sort of deal with, because one of the things that I see in your engagement and your conversations on LinkedIn is, yes, know that there are threads, but also it's equally important to know what is different about us. And some of that is doing your damn homework,
Yep.
right? Talk to us a little bit about like how you balance those things, because I think that's really key.
Yeah, I think the doing your own homework piece is really important because I think it goes back to what I was mentioning, sort of for better or for worse, right? And in this case, for worse, right? Like a lot of times when it comes to kind of more that brand side or an outsider's perspective, all Latinos are the same, right? For some, all Latinos are Mexican in the U.S., right? And there's nothing there's nothing wrong with that. We love it. We love everything. But the reality is, we are
We're
different, right?
different. Yeah.
And so if you really want to be able to reach Latinos broadly, what I have found is that it's important to really explore and understand those nuances of our unique kind of cultural heritage by country, and also how that's reflected in the US, right? And
So
it is,
how do you communicate that, Danny? Because I think it's very hard. And I know, me hago bolas if I'm trying to describe things because I think when we live here, like we will do like, what is it? The bandeja paisa from Colombia.
Oh yeah,
We just are exposed to all the food and all the
Curtidos and
people.
yeah.
So maybe we maybe take it for granted because we're so connected to the community. But as companies try to speak to our community, how do you help them or what advice do you give them?
yeah. I mean, it's always on a kind of case by case basis, right? But from my own perspective, right, it's that lived experience, right, and it's that deep willingness to truly explore what it means to be Latino and what it means to be an Argentinian Latino, what it means to be a
Yeah.
Colombian Latino, what it means to be a Puerto Rican Latino, right? But at the same time, what is a Puerto Rican that lives in the Bronx versus one in Orlando, right, or a
Yeah,
Mexican that lives
absolutely.
in Cali or in Texas? There's all these nuances even by region, and so I'm fortunate that I myself, have traveled and kind of been in these spaces, throughout. But it's really, looking at it from a different lens. I know we were talking briefly about college earlier, and so it kind of
Yeah.
what came to mind. One of my favorite classes that I took was called Hispanic Cities in Cinema. And I bring
Huh.
it up because it was this interesting look at how this idea of the Hispanic or the Latino city, right, can be reflected in film. And we looked at both cases of actual, Latino cities, so in the actual country itself, but also places, in the US that have a predominantly, Latino population, or in some cases, films that, aren't necessarily a Latino city, but the director itself is Latino, and you can then see how some of those aspects of their identity are portrayed throughout the city. And I think that's an interesting way to kind of think about it and
That is
about
a
the work
really
that
interesting
I do,
way. Yeah.
Yeah, I
that
no, go ahead.
that it is about kind of being able to kind of explore those things, and then how do you then translate those learnings and those lived experiences and those conversations and
Right.
those understandings and the data into actionable steps, whether it's how you write something, whether it's how you present something, whether it's what type of talent you're using for a campaign, what section of the population are you kind of targeting. All these different factors come into play on a case by case basis,
Yeah.
but it starts from really doing the work of understanding Latinos. And
I,
unfortunately, not a lot of brands are doing that,
yeah.
but some are really trying to pay attention that they need to.
Yeah. Yeah,
Danny,
if they want 30% of the country.
that's right, and growing, right? Danny, one of the things that I wanted to ask you, just thinking about the work that you're doing in culture, well, and then I want to shift gears because actually there's so many really cool things that we could talk about.
Oh,
But
totally.
is we had a conversation recently about Spanglish
Mm.
and the topic of just how language is important in the workplace, and we also talked about the fact that we're starting to see a lot more Spanglish
Oh, yeah.
in
My ads are Spanglish.
advertising and everything else.
My husband does not speak Spanish. He understands it pretty well, but he's like, "No, my ads are in Spanish." I'm like,
That's
"Sorry."
a good point. Yeah, and
Yeah.
hopefully he can at least understand what, like,
Oh, yeah,
40,
he
fifty
does.
percent of it.
Yeah.
But like, how are you seeing just the overall landscape as organizations are coming to, whether it's Comprende or Famosos
Mhm.
or anything like that, and they're starting to kind of shift maybe a little bit of what they're doing? How has Spanglish or just even like language
Mhm.
evolved the way that they've shown up?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So what we've seen and unfortunately continue to see, right? But it's obviously what we're trying to change, is that for many years, most marketing agencies and companies will say, "Hey, we've developed this incredible campaign for the general market. If you want to reach Latinos, let's just translate it into Spanish,
And
right?"
it's like the worst
And
translation.
it's the worst
Horrible.
translation, right?
Yeah.
My no
And
sabo baby could
Yeah.
translate.
exactly, right? And so the one thing to notice is that there's a lot of room for improvement, right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to that, why I say it's a great question is because the majority of Latinos, by from a data kind of perspective, are English dominant now, right?
It's
I studied
crazy.
some linguistics as well in college, and there was always this image that always stuck with me, which is kind of looking at four generations of Latinos in the United States,
Mhm.
and how you essentially go from both parents full Spanish to eventually the fourth generation is essentially full
English.
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 Right?
Yeah.
And it was represented kind of by flags, and you would see two big flags and then one big flag and then a smaller
That's a
flag,
great visual.
and then it kind of goes up, right? And so that's one of the mistakes, or one of the things, observations that we're seeing is, okay, you want to reach Latinos and the kind of next generation of buyers, you actually got to speak to them in English primarily. But
But have
beyond
people
that,
that look like us.
Yeah, and it still has to be authentic.
exactly, but
Sorry.
have Latinos,
Danny,
yeah.
you're the expert, but
Yeah,
we
yeah,
have
yeah. We
opinions.
have
We have
opinions.
opinions.
But precisely, right? Like, have a Latino, right, that is English dominant, give that message, right? That's one point. But then, you have Spanglish, and even though, right, we're English dominant, they still have some of that, right, that Spanish knowledge. And so some of that Spanglish, does come in, and
Yeah.
you do see kind of great results there. And then on the last side, right, is you see this growing movement of, especially with the younger generation wanting to kind of reclaim or truly kind of relearn, their culture and their
Can I
language.
just tell you how proud that makes me? Like I love that resurgence of like, yeah, they're like third generation, maybe fourth generation, but they know there's history there and they want it. And
Yeah.
Mm.
to me that
They're
makes me like
craving it. Yeah.
so proud. So I never knock a Latino who can't speak Spanish. I'm just like, welcome back.
Yep.
Here's
Yeah.
your taco. Let's go. Here's a good start,
Here's
right?
your arroz con gandules. Let's
Yeah.
go. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm exactly the same way, and fully agree. And it's amazing to see, right? But when it comes to kind of just my work, that means that, hey, a lot of them are following, right, these Spanish creators, or they are tuning into kind of Spanish media, because they want to find a way to kind of connect through those routes. And social media and television and film are one of the ways, and music especially, are one of the ways to do that. And
So
obviously we can
Danny,
see
in
that.
terms of like Spanish language, given your travels, your digital nomad life,
Right.
um, how do
Jealous.
you work on the right version of Spanish, right? Because like I was talking to, like I saw a possum and I was with my friends and they're from Venezuela and I was like, mira un tlacuache. And they're like, what? And I'm like, how do you call it? Like I had to like look it up and I still don't remember the proper name for it. And they're like, that's a Mexican name for it. And I was like, you're right, that's probably an Indian word. Like, and so how do you what like how do you do it? I'm not gonna try to answer question it.
Yeah, so a big part, one of it is like I've said, right, is that aspect of living and having that experience of being in these different places. And so picking up and learning and asking, right? But it is really interesting. And beyond that, just doing the research myself, whether it's through reading text, looking into, what are people talking about, how are they talking about, and doing sort of social listening in these different areas.
Oh, that's smart.
From a personal
Mhm.
perspective, right, it all comes in, right? Like it's funny. I mean, you mentioned that, and just today, I'm sort of dating somebody out here in Argentina, and
Oh, hey now.
whether it's her or other people, it's constantly like, "What did you just say?" Like it'll be her asking me, like, "What did you just say?"
You're
Or me
like
asking,
drawing it. You're
Yeah.
like,
exactly. Like today was my espejuelos, like which
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
glasses, and I'm like, "Have you seen my espejuelos?" And she's like, "Tu qué? Like you're what?"
yeah,
And
my
Yeah.
it's like,
gafas, my lentes,
that's
my.
how we say it, right? But
Yeah.
even then, yeah, like some other, in Mexico, they might say gafas or lentes or anteojos.
Anteojos,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's another beautiful thing that I think of the Spanish language is that it's very moldable and not to knock on the Spanish, but people from Spain might say, oh, Latinos are kind of killing the Spanish language. But we're
We
improving it, we're
celebrate
changing
it.
it, we're
Yeah.
Well,
uh,
this is, you talk about general market. I mean, this is really kind of becoming the non sort of
mm,
Spanish is becoming
mhm,
more general market. And I feel like, when I think about when I think about even reggaeton, for example, and
Mhm.
initially a lot of those artists were Puerto Rican, and now that has really evolved, and you've got Dominican reggaetoneros, you've got Colombian reggaetoneros, like each one of them brings a different part of their culture. And as you think about like mass, just how it's coming to the masses, it's funny. I had a friend, not necessarily the same, but I had a friend who's actually doing like a road trip through France right now and has done this like European thing, and he was literally in the center of France. Like there were no Latinos around him, and he's out at a social event, and Bad Bunny is playing, and all these French people are literally screaming the words out
Like,
to
who's
Nueva
Bunny?
York, and it's like. And he had this like surreal moment, right? But every time we allow ourselves a little bit of
Mhm.
that cultural exchange, it obviously makes us, I think, a lot better. And I'm sure you obviously are able to vouch for that. Um,
I always talk about like when we're in a different country where they don't speak Spanish or they don't speak English. I can't describe it, but I'm like when you hear Spanish, you're just like, who was that? Like, yeah, like they're my family. Like I
yeah.
need to go talk to them.
Yeah, and it's also interesting now how music is kind of becoming
Mhm.
that universal language. So
mhm.
I think that's really cool. I want to shift gears a little bit. So we had a whole podcast episode around the multi-hyphenate Latino, and I think you are obviously an embodiment of that
You're one
multi-hyphenate
of us.
Latino, right? So you've got the work you're doing with Famosos, obviously the work that you are as an entrepreneur doing with Comprende. Who knows what other things, you might have in the pipeline. Talk to us a little bit about what that means for you and like what effect that has had, and has that made your work better? Like what's been that effect?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, it comes into play both, in my identity, but also kind of in my, interests and my
Mhm.
passions. From the identity perspective, like we were talking about earlier, right? Being Puerto Rican, being American, moving and living in different places. I've always kind of had this sense of having to reinvent myself
Yeah.
almost. And I think as a result of that, uh, it's impacted me in a way that also in my career, and in my professional life, I've kind of become, that person of different identities as well. And it brings me back to this conversation that I had with a friend of mine, back in Miami, where she told me something about how, in life sometimes you can think about it as different chapters,
Mhm.
right? But the way, obviously, that's it might sound cliche, but the way she kind of explained it really kind of made sense to me. And for me, it's like I feel like I had this chapter where, I wasn't a lawyer, but I was in the legal field and I made an impact in that way, right? I then had the experience of sort of building, a tech startup. I've had experience kind of being in the social impact space. Now I'm building my own project, uh, experiencing this life traveling, but I've also had, explored interests where growing up, sometime I did musical theater, sometime I played soccer. Growing up, I also now, because I'm adult, I'm into making art, but I also like, doing different video work. I'm passionate about cooking and like have a dream of one day kind of opening, my own spot there as well in the
Oh,
future.
I bet your food would be great.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Especially with that little culinary
Yeah.
kind of experience that you've had. I saw recently you were like doing
Yep.
some wine tasting and all that other fun stuff. So,
Yep. And so I think, for a long time, people have wanted to place us in a bucket, right? And say, oh, you have to either pick one career and that's for your life, or you have to kind of pick one lane and kind of stay in that lane, and that's how you become successful. And there is some truth to that, right? In terms of being a specialist and doing this one thing,
I
really
always joke,
well.
like, I always talk about accountants because they're like accountants for life.
Yep.
and then there's people that like Nayeli who are like serial entrepreneurs. It sounds like you're heading in that
Like,
in that
what is he gonna
direction
do
too.
next? Yeah.
I've realized, we have at least one life, at least kind of in this body, and so, and while we're having this experience, I think it's important to lean into the things that call you,
Yeah,
and not necessarily passions, but I think, or not, like I don't think finding your passion is the most important thing, but more so finding your purpose. And when you find that purpose can manifest itself in many different ways.
I love
Uh,
that.
that's how I think about, the different work that I
Maybe
do.
can I ask you, have you had a company or an experience that didn't go how you wanted it to go? Or I mean, if not, that's cool too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think every experience I've had has kind of, added something, to me.
Mhm.
Love that.
But if I, obviously deciding to kind of leave a career, as a potential attorney, was obviously kind of a big
Probably
move.
hard. Yeah.
What I think I did, what I did take from that, or what frustrated me kind of in that experience, and I remember that this was sort of like the turning point once I that made me really truly realize like I think I need to do something else. Um, I was in a room where, even though I was an attorney, there was kind of these different affinity groups for the attorneys, and so I was at the Latinx kind of affinity group meeting that I would go to often. Um, and I'm not remembering all the exact details, but let's just say something kind of controversial had happened, in terms of something around partners and kind of promotions, at the firm that I was working at. And we had this full kind of conversation, and throughout the conversation it just sounded like, it's something that's been happening for years,
For a
right?
while. Yeah.
And but it was almost like, instead of really thinking, hey, what actionable steps can we take to try to change this, it was almost like, this complaining
Yeah.
and,
This is what happens.
this is kind of what it is. And that really disillusioned me, because I was wanting to come into the legal field to try to make this big change eventually. And if, attorneys that have been working there for so many years and have all this experience and, are making all this money and have all this,
Mhm.
theoretical impact on the firm, but then really they sort of didn't, and we're still kind of at the mercy of,
Of whatever
decision
was.
makers that have
Yeah.
been there for a long time. I realized, sometimes it's better if you, can, as they say, kind of bring your own chair to the table, but sometimes it means like actually building the table yourself.
Mm,
And maybe there's more power or more opportunity, kind of doing it that way. So that's what I would say in terms of like a maybe not so favorable
Right.
experience, but still kind of taught me a
yeah.
lot.
And
Yep.
I just wanted to I asked, like, what advice would you give someone, like, obviously, Danny, like, we wish we were doing what you're doing.
Oh yeah.
So what advice would you give to someone who's maybe thinking of becoming an entrepreneur or a digital nomad? Like, what give us your words of wisdom.
Yeah, I mean, the simplest thing I always tell people, right, is you have to take action.
Mhm.
It's so easy to just, constantly consume information or think about something, or maybe even say that you're going to do it, but not really actually take the time to do it.
Mhm.
And guilty as charged, right? Like
Yeah.
I've done that as well. And, Comprende wasn't the first sort of entrepreneurial project, that I started. And I had actually started like a version of it, before I actually truly, launched the way that I did. But once when I decided, to relaunch and to kind of commit, and to really kind of focus on it, in my case, right, uh, I kind of mentioned to you all, my kind of bigger vision is kind of creating this Latino owned marketplace. But I told myself, okay, what's the smallest step that I can take to kind of get closer to that goal?
Yeah.
Uh, at the time, I decided to do a newsletter, and I told myself, uh, you know, I'm going to commit to doing 10 newsletters, one newsletter a week for 10 weeks. I'd read somewhere that if you do something 10 times in a row, it becomes a habit, right? And so
Except
once
if you're potty training, you got to do it 21 times.
not everything in life, so
Yeah.
but in this case, right, that's kind of what I told myself, right? And every single week, that's what I did. And by the 10th, newsletter, I didn't, I kind of forgot to tell myself, oh, it's a 10th newsletter, right? But now reflecting back, it's like, okay, now it's time for the 11th one, right? And once I kind of went through doing that, then I started being a little bit more public and sharing more about what I
Nice.
was doing. And I think, having that sense of kind of public accountability can be scary.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of important and kind of keeps you, motivated, even though sometimes, it might be hard. But right, ultimately, again, saying you're going to do something and then actually doing it, there's a big difference. And so my biggest,
Del dicho al hecho hay un largo
really-
estrecho.
exactly, is just get
Danny.
started, right? Take the
Yeah,
smallest,
100%.
no matter what that looks like, those small steps, will compound. But if you don't
100%.
take that action, you're never
Yeah.
going to know, what could have been. And so I rather,
Get
try and
started.
fail than
Yeah.
never try.
Yeah.
Danny, what a great way to wrap up this conversation, honestly. I am so glad that we had an opportunity to connect. We're going to make sure that folks know about both the work that you're doing with Famosos and obviously the work that you're doing with Comprende. Obviously, anything we can do to help shine a light into that work, because we believe in you, we believe in the work that you're doing, and we think it's really important. One of the things
100%.
that we talk about often is Latino empowerment and just knowing your power, right? And so thank you so much for all of the work that you do around that. Thank you for the wonderful words of wisdom, and we wish you just tremendous success. Depending on if you stay in Argentina or wherever you go next, keep us posted. We will stay tuned. But truly, it's been just a really great time connecting with you.
And Danny, I'm sure you're cool if everyone who listens to Corporate Cafecito sends you a LinkedIn invite, so that we could follow your story and see what you're up to. And yeah, we just thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Well,
of
thanks
course.
again, everyone, for joining this conversation of Corporate Cafecito. We'll see you soon. Signing off, Carlos Butler Vale.
All right. We'll see you, Danny. Thank you again. Yo soy Nayeli Suárez Gas y aquí los esperamos.